Hello everyone and welcome back to the next episode of the Road to Feed the Master series. I left you 2 days ago after the analysis of round number 7, and as you can tell from the background I'm already at home, so there is still plenty more content to come because I have to give you the analysis of the round number 8, of the round number 9, summary of the tournament both individually and how did my team do. So plenty of things to cover today. As you can tell already from the length of the video, it's going to be quite a long one, so I don't want to give you any more introduction, but I want to say one more thing. I gave you the timestamps, so if you are here only for chess, you can skip to the parts of analysis of rounds number 8 and 9. If you are here for the story, you can skip the games and go fast forward till the end. If you are here for everything, then welcome, and I'll get you through everything that I want to cover today. So yeah, that's that. Let's jump straight into the first game. So in round number 8 we got paired with club Gryf Dębica. One more thing to add to you guys, because after the analysis of round number 7 I told you that I finished first, so I didn't know my team's result. In the end, not only myself drew the game, but also the whole team drew too, meaning that we were getting closer and closer to the avoiding the relegation. However, during the last 2 rounds we had to achieve at least 2 match points, meaning that we had to draw both games or win at least one. So we are approaching the must-win territory, and this was the match for life and death against Gryf Dębica. We got paired with the team that was similarly rated to ourselves, meaning that we had a great chance to avoid relegation with one round to go. So after 8 rounds, and I was the one yet again that was supposed to be winning his game, meaning that I had the biggest rating difference. However, the problem was that I had black pieces, as you can tell already from the board, and also my opponent was a FIDE master. So usually when you see a FIDE master with under 2100 ELO rating, you may say, okay, probably it's an older guy that does not treat chess as serious as previously in the past, let's say, and you should be getting an easy point. But in this instance it's not the case, because I knew that my opponent is preparing a lot, is still working on his chess, so it's not an usual older FM, if you may say that, that you would get, but I expected a tough game. And as you can tell, when you have to win on demand with such a player with black pieces, it's never an easy task. But that's enough of introduction. Let's get to the game itself. So my opponent opted with for e4, and I replied with c5, entering the sharpest possible opening. And after knight f3, d6, d4, as of now I took on d4. If you remember the analysis of the round number 6, you perhaps know that during that game I played knight f6, but in the end it's just a change of move order, because after takes, knight f6, I am still playing the Najdorf Sicilian, so nothing crazy and new here. But at that point my opponent changed the move that I was expecting the most, because most games were after h3 move for my opponent. He also tried many different systems, one of which was this move f4. I covered it a little bit, but perhaps not enough, and that's the problem. If you remember the game number 6, there was bishop d3, but as you can tell, f4 it is now. I knew that the main move and the move that I have already played during the tournament games was e5, and I was playing that. However, even though it's only move number 6, I had to remember what happens on the move number 15. How and why? I knew that after e5 the game will be a dynamic one, so we will both try to finish our development as quickly as possible, and I knew the main line that usually ends with the pawn loss for myself. So even though it's a move number 6, I knew that around move number 15 I will perhaps lose a pawn for the initiative, and I had to remember how can I make this initiative going. And that's quite hard, looking 10 moves ahead. And that's why, even though I was, let's say, prepared for the game, I had to, as of now, think quite for a long time, because alternative, much more easier to play with and much more calm, was to play e6 simply. But it was not my style, and I wanted to push e5 and go for the sharp game, because as I've told you, I had to win. So yeah, in the end, after some thought, I kind of remembered all the lines and I went for e5. So I played e5, my opponent went back to f3, I play knight to d7 to defend the pawn. He played a4 to stop my b5. I developed my queen to stop bishop from coming to c4. Therefore he went to d3. I played bishop e7, castle, castle, king h1, prophylaxis move, knight c5, the move that you also saw during the round number 6 because the setup was very similar for my opponent. Queen e1, and with the hopes of placing the queen here. And as you can tell, all those moves were not forced but logical. And the point is that I knew all of them, and I knew that at some point in some variations I will be losing the e5 pawn because of the trade on e5, because of the queen g3 move. So that's the thing I was thinking about on the move number 6. As of now, my task was to determine and remember the line, how should I develop those pieces, with which move order and to which squares, because I knew that move like bishop e8 exists, rook e8, bishop e6, maybe rook a to d8 and so on. So I had to figure out what was the move order in which I can actually give away the e5 pawn, and it's not that easy. But in the end I kind of remember that, okay, rook e8 was the move that I saw the day before the game during my preparations. So I felt like, okay, maybe rook e8 is the move to start with, and after f takes e5, d takes e5, queen g3, now I can play bishop e6. And after the game it turned out that until that point we were basically playing the main line, meaning that both myself and the opponent, because my opponent also fought for some time here, we let's say discovered the main theory once again. So thanks to that we are getting the, let's say, still theoretical position, and as you can tell the e5 pawn is hanging. Obviously knight takes e5 does not work ever because I have knight h5 hitting the queen, taking the f4 square away, so I will be getting the knight advantage. However, after queen e5 it's not so simple. So I knew that I had to gain many tempos on the queen, and I was planning on playing bishop d6, after queen g5 h6, after queen h4 knight g4, and I believe that that's the line, and I believe that I'm correct. And with the point being that, okay, I lost a pawn, but I have the pressure to the h2 pawn as of now, and dark squares in general. I have a pressure to the d3 bishop that seems inactive. My opponent wasted many tempos with the queen, so overall I should get a decent counterplay. And maybe for that reason, or maybe for the other reasons, at that point my opponent decided against taking the pawn, and he opted for knight g5. Perhaps not the most ambitious try, but logical too, because my opponent is trying to get the better pawn structure, because my bishop has nowhere to go other than trying to, firstly take on d3 with the hopes that if my opponent takes on d3, I can deliver the bishop c4 move or something, and if the pawn takes, as you can tell from the round number 6, maybe the b3 would be a good spot. However, obviously my opponent takes on e6 in between because he attacks the queen, he threatens with checkmate, so I had to take with the pawn, and the point is that as of now those pawns are weaker than my opponent's. However, I kind of expected move queen takes d3, since it would make the structure even more better for the opponent, if you may say that, because now one pawn is blocking the two of mine, and this is the majority here on the queen side. However, I felt like I might get just enough counterplay on this d and c files, making this pawn actually a problem for the opponent. It's an additional pawn here, but it may be under pressure on my open c file. Maybe that was the reason that my opponent took on d3 with a pawn, but the point is now that this pawn is also perhaps a target for me. So this position, you may say that is the end of the opening part, let's say, because I was out of theory as of now, and we are entering the territory of, thinking what to do next. So pure middle game, let's say. So it seems obvious that my plan will be to fight for the f file and d file and so on. So I decided to start with the move rook f8. The point is that there are always some problems with this and this hit. So for example, if I wanted to play bishop b4 to hit the knight, then rook f6 might be a possibility with some problems. So I wanted to avoid that, and I played rook f8. Also some nasty tactics are here now for me, including a move like knight e4. So let's say my opponent plays something really bad, I have knight e4. The point is that if my knight is taken in any way, then I will deliver the checkmate, and if my opponent firstly exchange the rooks, once again knight is untouchable because I will deliver the checkmate. And as of now I already got a pawn advantage. I am attacking the queen, all the other threats and so on. But obviously my opponent saw that coming, so after rook f8 he just simply developed the bishop, made the rooks defend each other, so there are no more tricks on my side, but it was a normal developing move, so I reply with such one too. So rook a to d8, after queen h3 hitting this pawn at that time, I decided to play queen c6, protecting this one from c6 square, and after rook f to d1 I decided that I want to play a move like rook d6, because as of now rook is looking both here and there, so felt like amazing square for the rook. However, only after rook a to c1 I saw what's coming at me. So the point is that I wanted to create the triple battery on the d file, trying to hit the weakness. However, after the so-called planned move queen d7, I spotted that after d4 I might be getting into some trouble, because if I take, moves like e5 might be played, delivering the fork, and the problem is that my fork is also on the board. However, I am attacking two light pieces while my opponent is attacking a light piece and a rook, so a little bit worse than that, and I couldn't really figure out the continuation from that point onwards. I was calculating a line like this, here, here, and now I believe both rook b1 and actually this move would work, so I would be losing just far too much material. So even though computer says it's fine as of now for me, I just didn't know what move to play, because if I go away with the rook, then maybe I'm fine. No, I don't know what's the move. But yeah, the point is that I got myself into trouble because my pieces from, let's say, this point onwards were looking and going for the unusual spots, let's say. So after rook a to c1 was played, I thankfully saw that d4 move coming, and I decided to play the other move, which is queen to e8. The point is that as of now my queen will try to transfer to the king side, and I will not make my rook so close there with staying on d7 square. Queen h5 was, I believe, an inaccuracy from my opponent, because okay, it attacks the pawn, but it just makes makes things easier for me, because I can simply play with queen to h5 to the spot I wanted to, protecting the pawn. So all in all, very good sequence from my perspective, I would say. Also, I'm threatening with some tricks once again. If my opponent played a move like, okay, let's say like this, I might be now looking at some moves like this. Obviously it's not working now, but just to give you a simple line, if such variation occurs on the board, I might be thinking about sacking the queen and nearly delivering some checkmates. Obviously, as you can tell, it's not working as of now because opponent can cover it and there are too many white pieces on the board. However, you know, there is something going on, so my opponent stops that immediately with the move h3, giving the breathing space for the king and also covering the g4 square, because both g4 and e4 knight jumps were working quite similarly. And at that point, thankfully, since my rook is no longer close, let's say, I could have played rook f to d8, and I did that with the point of pressurizing the d3 pawn, and my opponent then opted for bishop c5 and bishop b6, trying to disrupt my rook battery, let's say. And only after those two intermediate moves, intermezzos I believe it's called, he now played d4, trying to fight for the d file without my battery being fully loaded. And after a few exchanges, I felt like this position is an okay with me, because structurally it's a very similar situation. In terms of activity, I have a better queen, maybe worse bishop, and you know, plenty of things to be resolved, to be honest. And I very much liked the fact that the e5 square is not taken yet by anyone, because I felt like after a sequence of, let's say, rook d8, bishop d6, bishop e5, if there would be any exchanges of any sort on the e5 square, my queen would be just the most amazing piece ever here on this square, looking everywhere on the board. So I felt, okay, that might be my chance, and that's why I started with the move rook to d8, hoping that my opponent will just simply retreat the bishop, allowing me to do all that stuff. However, my opponent was precise here. He played queen c7, trying to make things easier, let's say, by the some exchanges, and I was really not so sure how should I approach this position, because after the bishop exchange, which would be rook d4, queen e7, I can tell that okay, I am the one with more activity, mostly, because actually as of now this queen is kind of annoying, so I would have to kick it away. But surely my bishop is better, my rook is better, right? So that's actually something to like. Yeah, alternative would be to perhaps play a move like rook to d7, trying to maintain this pressure and this pressure, protect my bishop. However, now after, let's say, queen to b8, I didn't know if I really want to go king f7, because the other choice was only to go back and then it would be the repetition, because queen f7 seems okay, queen is supposed to be safe here, pawn is protected, so what's bad about it? But I just didn't feel so good about it, that queens are still on the board and my king is approaching the center. So yeah, I decided against it. I decided to simplify the position a little bit, with the hopes that after queen f7 my opponent would actually trade his queen. He didn't do that, because after such trade my rook is far more superior to the opponent's one. I am hitting many weaknesses, so I should be even winning this endgame. I calculated it quite deep and I was winning in most or even all variations. So it's logical that my opponent refused to trade, played queen c5. I now played queen d7. I had heart attack for a split of a second, because I spotted the tactic of knight d5, disrupting the connection between my queen and the rook, making my rook not able to go anywhere, and some tactics and so on. But thankfully I believe that simple move as this one would work, because even if such thing happen, I can always trade the queens and I will not lose any material. But it was a moment that I didn't feel so great about my situation. But anyway, it's just the tactical research for my opponent. Strategically I am more than fine. After e5 move I played knight h5, trying to maybe create some pressure on the opponent's king. So that's the reason I believe that my opponent played king h2 to avoid any checks and so on. And at that point I am kind of lacking the good moves to play, really, because I don't want to activate my rook too early, since it would give away the e4 square for the knight. And if that's the case, I don't want to move this rook. Moving the knight is as of now pointless, even though it's on the edge of the board. It seems fine. Queen is responsible for protecting everything, so what should I play? And I decided to play a waiting move h6, both waiting and making some space for my king, so seems quite practical. And after rook f1, rook f4, the rooks were traded and knight stayed on e4, went to e4 anyway. And the point is that obviously, as you can tell, Ivar Bar was liking my position for the bigger part of the game, let's say, but my advantage never crossed the 0.5 advantage, basically. So it's all about the details, nuances, and I believe that with the correct depth, let's say, of calculations, computer would give 0.00 anyway. So the point is that I should be the one that is maybe pushing for something. We are approaching the time control, but is there anything really that I can rely on? I was not so sure. The point is that I am now hitting this weakness. My knight might create some problems to the opponent's king, and actually him having the pawn more advanced is bigger of a weakness than mine on e6. So those were the details, the nuances that I could rely on, but it was not enough to really win the game. Why is that? I decided to start with a cheeky move, king to h7, once again trying to wait for my opponent's response. But the point is that after b3 holding the a4 weakness, e5 weakness is also taken care of. So like, what can I really do here? I was not so sure, and not only that, even though my opponent was in time trouble, after queen to d3 move, hitting the knight, hitting the pawn seems logical. My opponent found a tactical resource of knight to f6 check, with the point that if I ever accept the knight, there would be the perpetual check. So I didn't want to do that, because guys, at this point we were having the advantage with 2.5 points to 1.5 points, meaning that my draw would mean that we will not ever lose the game, the match as a team, because it will be 3 against 2 already. And on the other board we had a better position. So why would I refuse to draw this game by perpetual? Well, the point is that on the other board the position was better, but far from being obvious, because there were very big material imbalance. So I didn't know how will the game be played out, and for that reason I decided that I have to be still playing in order something goes wrong. That's my point and that's my thinking. So even though, as I've said, drawing here would guarantee us at least a draw in the match, I decided to continue playing, and for that reason I went with a risky choice of king to g6. Obviously I cannot ever go down because it would mean that I will be checkmated in one move, so if you want to take a risk you have to do it responsibly. So king g6 may not seem so responsible, but the point is that as of now there are no more checks to my king, and thanks to that I may be now getting this one additional tempo that will allow me to grab a pawn or maybe create some checkmate threat, and so on so on. However, my opponent found very important move queen to f2, hitting my knight and asking me a question: do I want to go into a queen endgame or not? Because I had the opportunity to take here, then take here, and maybe get a position like that with one more pawn. However, I felt like with my king being here and my queen being here, it would be nearly impossible to avoid any perpetual checks, and it's also a move number 41, so it would mean that my opponent would get the additional 30 minutes to think about the situation. So I felt, okay, in here I have no really way to win the game, so I decided against exchanging the knights, even though it would guarantee me a pawn advantage, and I played queen f5, trying to keep the queens and the knights on the board and trying to keep the pressure to the e5 pawn, because even though Evalbal says that it's still 0.00, I am the one asking my opponent a question: does he want to exchange the queens? If not, how is he going to deal with this pawn weakness and other stuff? And this is unfortunately move number 41. So in here, immediately after having the 30 minutes added, my opponent spent over like 10 minutes in this specific moment immediately what to do, because you know there are many moves to be considered, like queen g3 check, queen e3, maybe some others like more active ones that are also more risky, and so on. So plenty of things to consider, and in the end I believe my opponent chose the best possible option, and it's queen e3 move. The point is that it's not only protecting the pawn and attacking the knight, but the point is that it's also covering the c5 square, and I believe that it's the best option also for one more reason, but I can't really recall what was that. But yeah, that's the general point of this move, and for that reason I'm kind of out of moves here, if you think about it, because I cannot really move my knight anyway in a way that it would be better than it is on d3, because it's a perfect spot for him, but it makes my queen not able to move, because like it has to protect the knight. So then if the queen and the knight cannot move or don't want to move, how should I play? With the pawns or the king? King will not win me a game yet. So yeah, I decided to try to test out my opponent, and while he was calculating queen e3, I was trying to find the most practically difficult variation for him to face, and I chose b5 move, asking my opponent does he want to exchange the pawns, or maybe he does not want that. For example, if he exchanges, I believed that then my pawn will not be a weakness perhaps, but this one might be, and if my opponent pushes the pawn, then perhaps I can push my pawn too, trying to make things even more messy, let's say. With the time advantage, I felt like it would be a good practical choice, but my opponent played once again precisely knight to b8, making the trade not on b5 but rather a4, a4 square. And the point also that as of now his knight is attacking my pawn, and just a second ago I was attacking his, right? Also, one point to notice is that I cannot ever go for such trade, because such a pawn is much worse than this one. Outside passer, we know the real danger of it, especially against the knight, so I cannot really go for such trade, and for that reason I have to actually defend the pawn with knight b4, and as of now my opponent played a5, so it's quite an interesting dynamic because those pawns are advanced, mine are not. However, I would love to plant my knight on c6 attacking both weaknesses, but opponent's knight is protecting the square. So once again I was kind of out of moves, and that's the reason why I chose the move king to h7, trying to make my king, let's say, a little bit safer after staying on g6 for so long, and also asking my opponent what move will he play. because he's also in kind of, let's say, Zugzwang, because we were Zugzwanging, let's say, each other all the time, not so many moves to be considered. So yeah, after king h7 my opponent has to decide what to play, and he decided to go for knight to d7, which actually, right, allowed me to jump to c6 with my knight, so I felt okay about it. But the point is that after queen c3, now the queen is holding everything together with the knight. So even though I got my knight to my dreamed spot, let's say, I cannot really push it like more forward. In chess, in order to win a game, it is said that you perhaps should create at least two weaknesses in the opponent's camp, and I kind of got that because both e5 and a5 are not the best pawns in the world, and also I might try to create some counterplay on the opponent's king. However, it's not enough to win the game because my opponent was still playing precisely. How did the game continue? I decided to give a check and then go for the full attack knight d4. Maybe my opponent will get scared, right? Because I'm threatening with knight e2, fork, and if not fork, it's at least a check, allowing me to create some checkmating patterns, let's say. So I felt like, okay, this might be my chance, but my opponent, even though he was only having like 10 minutes as of now on the clock, he calculated moves for like 7 minutes, I believe, and he just played queen d3 followed by queen takes a6. So he was not scared about being checkmated, and he took my pawn, which kind of switched the dynamic a little bit, meaning that either I will find the checkmate or I will be the one that will have to fight for a draw. Obviously I have a perpetual check all the time here, so I can do just that and draw the game. However, I will not be having any further chances during the game because I have to react quickly and dynamically. So I chose to give a check on e3 square with the hopes that my opponent would go to h1, because then I would be actually trying to win a game with knight to e2 move, because I calculated some crazy lines with my queens, with my kings march towards the center of the board. It was not working, but I would be, considering the runaway, let's say. So the point is that after queen c8, king f7, queen f8, king g6, queen e6, king g5, I am only allowing the, let's say, only checks in the position. I'm not allowing many of them to choose from for the opponent. After queen e7, king f4, my queen here is amazingly placed because it covers both h4 and b4 squares, not allowing my opponent to checkmate me from either side of the board. So after king f8, I would go perhaps with king e3, queen f3, king d2, and as of now, my king is so safe. Look at this, no more checks to be given. And for that reason, as you can tell, Ivar Bar says I'm winning, because this checkmate threat is just too much for the opponent to handle. He can try to play a move like this, I guess, but then I can simply just take the pawn and maybe go back and still create some danger. So all in all, I would be winning the game. Obviously, around this point, the problem is that if I go to e3, now a3 square is possibility for a white queen, and the point is that after king d2, some checks can still be delivered, and as you can tell, as of now I would be losing, perhaps due to the queen trait on the diagonal, but the point is that after queen a3 it's still a draw. And if I went with queen e4, I believe that knight c5 would be a draw too, because after king e3, even though this diagonal is now closed, queen f3 becomes once again a good option, because after king to d2, knight is covering the d3 square, so it allows white to continue checking me and so on. So as you can tell, quite complex variations, but I had all the time in the world, let's say, to calculate it, and I had a really big pressure from my, let's say, team situation, because as I've told you guys, during those 10 to 15 moves that we just covered until this point, my teammate actually lost his game because the position was, as I've said, very unclear, and the score was 2.5 to 2.5. So I really had to push for a win in order to win the match for my team, in order to avoid relegation for sure, with one round to spare. So that was my motivation. However, I didn't want to risk it too much, because if I would lose, then I would be, the villain here for my team. So not only that, my opponent played to h2 with the king. What's the difference? The difference is that I don't have this intermediate check with on e1 square, and if I now go with knight to e2, once again the problem is that after being checked, I am not really allowed to go further away with my king, because after king f8 my queen is on the way. On e1 it was perfectly placed. On e3 is just blocking my king, and even though king e4 might be a tempting, let's say, try, it's a very simple way for white to win the game, which is just to play queen f3, trade the queens, and this pawn will shortly promote. For those reasons, after king to h2, after this check, I didn't really have any other choice than just to deliver the perpetual, so I decided to play queen f4, king h1, now queen to c1. Obviously I don't want to blunder the queen on f1, right? And after queen c1, king h2, queen f4, king h1, we finally agreed to a draw, making a draw for the team 2. Neither of players were happy, because both my opponent and I knew that in order to be sure of avoiding relegation for our teams, we had to win this game. But what can you tell? It was a very equal game. As you can tell from the eval bar, not a single moment of big advantage for any side, and I will just try to show you the review to prove my point. So yeah, a pretty good game for both players. As I've told you guys, even though my opponent was a lower rated one, you cannot expect to win every game against such player. Accuracies were amazing, end game was good, middle game played also correctly, so all in all a clean game from both sides. But the point is that, well, we still haven't avoided relegation. And with that thought, we were waiting as a team for the last game pairings, hoping for a good one, but it weren't good one, because we, as you know, were listed as the team number 22 out of 22 teams, meaning that we had the lowest rating of all teams in the competition, in the tournament, and we got paired against the team with number 8, so 8 out of 22, meaning that on basically each board they were higher rated than ourselves. And also, not only that, the problem was that well, they were also fighting to avoid relegation, because they were not having a good tournament, but still, the rating is the rating, they were much higher rated, so we had to give our best as a team to win the match, or at least not lose it, because at the beginning of the video I told you guys that we had to get 2 match points. So after a draw in this 8th round we got that 1 point, so in order to avoid relegation we couldn't lose the last match. How did the game go? Let's see. I will just simply change the round number, and we can go into the next game. As you can tell, I am repeating the black pieces, the point being that not only we got higher rated opponents, but also we got black pieces as a team again, meaning that I was once again the one that was supposed to be winning, because I had a good tournament and my opponent was not having one. However, as you can tell, our title is the same, our rating is similar, and winning on demand with black pieces, it's never an easy task. Not only that, half of our, let's say, main squad went away for personal reasons, meaning that we were left with not such a great team as usual, fighting for relegation with black pieces. Never a good story. However, we will not fold, and we will not just resign from fighting, and that's what we did. During the game my opponent opted for knight f3 move, which took me by surprise, and I was really so relieved to see it that I smiled and even maybe laughed a little bit at the board, because actually the last round was at 9 AM, and until 8:40 I just didn't know what to play against e4, because my opponent was choosing so many crazy and different and strange lines against so many of my usual openings. In the Sicilian, plenty of variations. In the Caro-Kann, in the e4, e5, like dozens of variations to cover. I even considered Scandinavian. So, like, guys, if I consider Scandinavian as an opening choice for the must-win round, it has to tell you that my opponent was playing some crazy chess in each opening. So when I saw this calm knight f3 variation, I was like, thank everyone, thank God that it's just that, because as of now we are playing basically both out of the opening book. My opponent didn't want to get into sharp lines against me, I guess, and I didn't want to get into sharp lines against him, so quite a funny dynamic. But yeah, knight f3, so happy to see it, because it allowed me to have a calmer game with more control, I felt like. And in the team tournament, if you have to look at all the boards, what are your teammates doing. It's very, very important. So let's start the game. Knight f3, knight f6, b3, so not the most, let's say, ambitious approach, but maybe the point for my opponent was to not lose the game for the team, right? But I replied with g6, bishop b2, bishop g7, and d4. I was not sure about this move. Obviously it's still a theoretical move, but I felt like if my opponent is not usually playing knight f3, he might be out of, let's say, moves to play if I will play it strangely, I believe. And also I don't really fancy playing d4 move with the bishop being here, because the dynamic will be that my bishop will be better one, because I might be the one to pressure the center. So I didn't like this choice. I would much rather prefer for my opponent to play e3, maybe c4, more of that move order, but it's his problem, right? After d4 I just played d5, blocking the d-pawn, and after e3 I castled, and after bishop e2 I thought to myself like, okay, I have to do something about the center, because if I allow my opponent to just simply castle, play, I don't know, like knight d2, c4, queen c2, rook c1, rook d1, it's all so solid and so calm that maybe it's okay because I don't have to risk anything yet, but I want to have some at least spiciness on my side going on in order to create some pressure. And even though I just developed this side of the board and I didn't do so with this one, I decided to play, let's say, against the rules as in the analysis number 7 and play knight e4. The point is that I am immediately opening up this diagonal. I am immediately saying, okay, I'm going to play c5, knight c6, pressure, you're here, what are you going to do? And I believe my opponent didn't really want to go for such line, because how do you deal with this pressure? Once again, I will mention that I don't like this d4 move, because what? Do you play a move like this, trying to just, you know, block everything and hope for a draw in the game? Okay, you may try that, but you know, it's not the most ambitious of tries. If not, what do you really play? Like, I am putting pressure, big one, let's say, you have to deal with it, right? So that's why perhaps my opponent chose to go for the c4 move himself, trying maybe to make me not play c5 myself, but I felt, why wouldn't I do it, right? So I took on c4 first, and after b takes c4 I would play c5 anyway, trying to still pressure the d4 pawn, and the point is that bishop on b2 is not protected, so all the d5 moves trying to block the situation would not ever work. So for those reasons I was more than happy to see the c4 move. I took on c4, and to my surprise opponent took with the bishop, so it was a sign of both not being maybe able to assess the position strategically and correctly, and the second thing was that my opponent is in no mood to win the game, because after b takes c4 we would be having an unusual pawn structure, let's say not symmetrical and so on. After bishop takes c4, opponent is basically hoping that after c5, cd4 at some point he will be able to take on d4 with the piece, meaning that both c and d pawns will be gone for both sides, but the structure will be symmetrical, because in the symmetrical structure it's hard to win. That was more or less my thinking process. So I decided, okay, I will do everything in my power to make this game not so strategically, structurally similar. So I wanted to play c5 and knight c6 in order to create an isolated pawn, not the similar structure, but the isolated pawn. And for that reason I knew that perhaps I would be required to play a move like bishop g4. So after a move like queen e2 I was more than happy to see it. However, the point is that finally the bishop is protected, and for that reason I really have to think about, okay, what's going on this pressure, is my opponent allowed to take me on c5 or not really? So bishop g4 had to be played after some consideration. So bishop g4, the point was that after let's say b takes c5 I can actually try to take on f3 first, because queen cannot take it, because I would take here and there, and after g takes f3 I can simply play maybe here, here and there. Maybe also I can just simply take on c5 and allow the opponent to take there. But the point is that at least something new is going on the board, right? This is not a symmetrical pawn structure. I believe I have the better one. I have two knights versus bishop and the knight, so plenty of things to play for. So I was happy to achieve such position. One very important variation was also d5 push. once again opening this diagonal but without opening the position in general. But as of now I have prepared knight to e5 move, and the point is that I am actually creating so much pressure on this square that I would be even gaining the advantage, the material one, because if my opponent tries to make this pressure lower and the rook is hanging, and if he does not try to do that, I can just simply try taking him on the f3 square, right? So I don't know, he plays there, I can take. Once again I'm hitting here, there. I am just simply winning quite early in the game, you must say. So for those reasons I believe d5 is not working. One variation that I didn't particularly like was bishop d3 move, because even though it's dropping back the bishop, it's attacking my knight, and I was unsure how to react against it. But then I thought, okay, I can just simply take on f3 and go back to g5. Even though this square seems odd for my knight, I am pressurizing the f3 pawn a little bit. I am still maintaining amazing pressure to the d4 pawn, and if my opponent tries to move like, let's say, f4, I can then play knight e6, and the pressure is just too big to handle for the opponent. So for those reasons I felt like, okay, bishop d3 is not working either, so I can play this move, I am free to go. My opponent replied with h3, which is not the, let's say, sharpest of the possibilities and the replies, so I was more than happy to see that. I took an f3, and my opponent had the choice of taking with the pawn, but knight g5, knight e6 continuation works perfectly fine. But also I would consider knight d6, to be honest, because after dc5 takes, I am temporarily a pawn down, but such a pawn structure screams problems for the opponent. Also I have one little one, so I would have to consider, do I like this position for my winning chances or not really. So I would decide between knight g5 and knight d6, but after me taking on f3, opponent replied with queen taking on f3, and it allowed me to play knight d6 like without any stress, because once again queen went away from protecting the bishop, so with that pressure d takes c5 is not a possibility. For that reason white has to really react, because if bishop goes away, like, I don't know, to d3, let's say, I can just simply try taking the pawn on d4, not only creating an isolated pawn, but just simply getting the pawn advantage. For those reasons I believe that it would be the best for the opponent to just simply try to develop somehow, maybe rook to d1, saying, okay, I am worse here, but at least I am not losing any material. But I believe that at that point I prepared queen b6 with the threat of taking on c4 and then b2, and with the threat of taking on d4. So I believe that the computer likes the position so much because it sees that there is no really any defense for the opponent. So yeah, I was feeling more and more happy about my situation. It's only move number 12, but I had already, like, I don't know, 40 minutes advantage on the clock, and amazing position. So yeah, my game plan was working very well, and I believe my opponent simply made a mistake of not going into sharp lines, because this is what he is best at. So yeah, cannot complain, right? And my opponent continued to think for a long time. As of now he decided to play bishop d5, and very nice try going for some tactics, but at the same time you have to be even more precise now as of white, since after knight b4 I am putting pressure here. There is the pressure on the diagonal still, and there are the pressures on the d file and so on, so plenty of variations to consider really. So I felt like knight a3 will be the only choice for my opponent, so he played that. And after cd4 I knew that after ed4 I would not be getting the material advantage, but once again with such an isolated pawn and much better coordinated pieces, I felt like I will be the one pushing for a win, and I was happy to take my chances, you know. My time advantage grew at maybe even to an hour or something, maybe something close to that. So more than happy to continue playing like that. But my opponent on the move number 15 completely blundered the game away. It's clear that it was not his day completely, and the tournament too, because as I've said, even though our ratings were similar, I was the one that was supposed to be winning for the team, and my opponent took on d4 with the bishop. And you may say, okay, what's the problem, right? What's the difference? It's like you either get such position or the position with the bishops. So what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that bishop on b2, even though it was worse than mine on g7, at least it had a very important task of defending the knight. And as of now, the knight is not protected, and the bishop is protected but attacked. So it's a tactic for my, let's say, students, the beginner ones, let's say, trying to find a move that will hit both pieces at the same time and get the piece advantage. So not that often you can see on the move number 16 such a motive in the game between 2200 rated players, but here we are, right? So obviously the move is queen a5, hitting the knight, hitting the bishop, and it's like no defense for the opponent. The nicest try, I believe, would be to play knight c4, trying to go away with one of the pieces and attack my queen, but I have simple queen d5 because knight is protecting it, so obviously there is nothing more to add there. My opponent decided to take on b7, but then I can simply exchange on b7, take on a3, and even though my opponent grabbed the pawn on b7 and e7, so he actually has 2 pawns in exchange for the knight. Obviously in a practical game, classical game, at this level is just not enough. I decided to be very precise about the game because, you know, I'm playing not only for myself but for the team too. So I was considering, let's say, a fast approach of knight c2, hitting the rook, hitting the queen, protecting mine, so forcing the exchanges. But I didn't like the fact that my opponent has a tempo now to try to maybe go through c5 to activate the rook. So I decided, okay, I will just keep the queens on the board, and that was basically the only the last choice of the game and for the tournament actually, because I just decided, okay, I will kick away the queen once, kick away the queen twice. Now I will just simply try to target the weaknesses on d4, on a2, and so on. And finally, after one more move, my opponent resigned the game. Obviously, there is nothing more to be done. So yeah, pretty clean, pretty surprisingly easy win. But I will take that any day, any time, especially in such a important game like today, this one, because I was playing, as I've said, for my team with black pieces, and I won convincingly, quickly, giving my team a well-needed boost, confidence boost, let's say. So yeah, at that point, after my win, we were leading point and a half to half a point because it was also already one draw on the board number 1, and I was just, you know, cheering for my team. And we went from the, you know, from heaven to hell to heaven finally. And our woman player on the board number 6, which had a result of 0 points from the 5 games until that point, finally woke up, let's say, and during the last game, the most important one, she won an amazing game, leading us to, let's say, avoiding the relegation. We won the whole match 4-2, so pretty convincing win at the end of the tournament, allowing us to stay in the league. But before I will tell you more about the details, let's just see the review of this game, because actually I am quite interested, like, how will the computer evaluate the situation. So let's see. And in the meantime, yeah, as you can tell, I didn't make any mistake because I had no time to do it really, because my opponent allowed me to play an amazing game without much effort. My opponent obviously had nearly 90 accuracy, but as you can tell, the game was not that great from his perspective. So if he had a lower rating, perhaps chess.com would rate it much lower, but that's not my let's say problem. Anyway, that's a clean win. Let's get back to the summary first individually. So individually, I played all the games, so 9 games during this tournament. I did not lose a single one, so I won 4 times. I drew 5 times, sometimes against lower rated opponents, sometimes against higher rated ones. So all in all, amazing tournament, because I gave my, let's say, team the confidence of having a player that will not lose the game, so that's always nice. And individually I scored 6.5 points out of 9. I was playing on board number 3, and such a score allowed me to, as you can see, achieve the second place on the board number 3, meaning that out of all the players playing on this board, I had the second result, because only one player from the top team had 7 out of 9. You may know the guy because it's Cossack Chess from here on YouTube. I was the second one, so amazingly well played by my side, and not only that, I gained over 30 rating points. So if you consider this performance and also the previous ones from the summer, during the span of like 3 months I gained like 80 rating points, or 90 even. so I'll take that every day, all day, all night. Amazing results, so I'm getting closer to my goal, so thank you all for joining me on this journey, let's say. So individually, amazing tournament, I cannot complain about anything. And let's now sum up the team performance, because as I've told you guys, at the end of the tournament, thanks to this win, as you can tell, we got the place number 12. It is the highest place ever in this tournament. We were not placed any higher at any point, so quite a nice jump there at the end. And as you can tell, we were playing the team that is listed as 19th place, as I told you, so 8th number on the starting list. And as you can tell, from the 19th place to the 9th place, there were not so many big differences, because there were 7, 8 or 9 big match points. So only one match really would decide whether you are 9th or 19th. So pretty close tournament. And the problem is that teams from the places from 19, 20, 21 and 22 are relegated to the second division for the next year. So as you can tell, last 3 spots were more or less fixed after even round number 7, we can say. But all the teams from the, let's say, place number 10 to the 19 was not so sure about the not being relegated. So pretty tough tournament, but we got there in the end. 12th place, 50% score as a team with the last number on the starting list. It's an amazing performance, so I would like to thank all my teammates. I am very glad that I helped my team a lot, and I appreciate the effort that my teammates also delivered. And yeah, we are over the moon with the result, with the place. We can't wait for the next year's edition, and that's that for this tournament. So if you like this video, I know it's probably one of the longest, if not the longest one as of now on the channel. Please remember to give a like to boost the YouTube algorithm or whatever. As of now, perhaps individually, I will be having some break from playing chess, because you know the school year is coming, so plenty of work, teaching schools, teaching clubs, teaching individually. So less playing. That's life of a chess coach, let's say. But yeah, I am glad that I had such opportunities to play during the summer. If you now want to follow my work, let's say, you can perhaps wait for some YouTube things here on the channel. I will try to upload some videos. If you want to get some coaching, please hit me up. I will be happily teaching you guys. And yeah, thanks for watching this video, the whole series so far. Plenty of videos, more to come in the future. And with that, thank you all, and we'll see each other. Bye bye.